Welcome back to CFO Weekly, where we're talking with financial leaders about how to build efficiency in their teams, create time for strategy, and ultimately get results. With your host, Megan Weis. Let's jump right in.
Today, my guest is Christian Wattig. Christian is an energetic, enthusiastic FP&A leader with 12 plus years of experience at multinational consumer goods companies and fast-growing tech startups. As an entrepreneur, he teaches FP&A skills to finance teams and business leaders via his live online course, FP&A Bootcamp. He's also the head of training at DataRails. Christian discovered his passion for teaching when he led the finance learning and development team at Unilever, creating finance courses for his colleagues. He earned his MBA at NYU Stern School of Business and lives in New York City. Hello, Christian, and thank you for being on today's episode.
Thanks so much for having me, Megan.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. Today, we'll be learning about you, of course, but we'll also be hearing about the importance of financial storytelling and business partnering in the practice of FP&A and why these skills can be so elusive. And Christian, you're an expert in the space with passion for teaching, coaching, and mentoring business leaders wanting to improve their skills within FP&A. And I'm really looking forward to learning from you today. So let's get started. First,
Excellent.
And as always, let's start with you and your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So the first half of my career, the first 7 years was in consumer goods. That's where I originally started. I started at Procter & Gamble in Switzerland. Originally, I'm from Germany, and that's where I grew up. Large multinational consumer goods company. But working there, I knew eventually I would want to end up in the US because my fiance at the time is from the States. And, so I was, already plotting a way of changing jobs and moving to the US. And so after 4 years, I thought the time is right. I quit my job. I came over here really without anything. I didn't have much furniture or really possessions back then, so that was fine. But I was incredibly lucky to get a role, shortly after at Unilever. Unilever is another large consumer goods company. You may know them from brands like Magnum and Breyers and Dove. And I did a number of different FP&A roles there, promoted a few times as well into leadership roles. And after sometime later, I spent about 7 years at Unilever. Then I took my MBA. And during the MBA, I talked to people who worked in tech and at fast-growing companies. And what they told me is that decision-making happens a lot faster than in these, large traditional companies. And so I was really interested about that. And that's where I ended up after my MBA. First, I worked at Squarespace, led the FP&A team there. It's a website builder company. It was super exciting because we went public while I was there. And then I moved to DataRails, which is an FP&A software company. That's where I am now. And I have to say that what it told me is true. Decision-making is a lot faster when you're working at a smaller company, especially in tech, where things are changing very fast.
Yeah.
And I was happy with that decision because the faster things change, the more I was able to learn.
And have you always had a passion for financial planning and analysis? Is that an area you've always known you wanted to get into?
Yeah. So in undergrad, I realized that what I really enjoy about FP&A and why I wanted to get into it is this combination of, on the one hand, puzzle solving, essentially, right? Digging into the numbers, figuring out what the connections are, figuring out, okay, what are the numbers really telling us? What's the story behind the numbers? That's one side of it, the puzzle solving piece. And the other side is the almost psychology piece, right? Taking that information, packaging it in a way that people without a technical background understand it, and hopefully encouraging other leaders to take action on it, right? Because that's the ultimate goal, is to discover insights in the data that then result in the company, making use of that and taking action on it. So I always enjoyed that it's this combination of getting into the numbers, doing analysis, but then also working closely with other teams, with people, and having that close partnership. And that's what interested me about FP&A, and that's why I stick with it for so long.
And you made the move from being a finance leader to teaching finance leadership. So what inspired that move?
Yeah, so when I first got promoted to a leadership role, I realized that what I enjoyed most is teaching and coaching my direct reports. I really enjoyed it when there was something that I knew that would make their life easier and that would help them, work more efficiently and have better results in their careers. And I was fortunate that Unilever offered me to lead the learning and development team there. The finance learning and development team. I did that on the side while I was working in an FP&A role. And there I had the chance to create courses for my fellow finance colleagues. Unilever has a large finance team in North America. There are about 150 finance people. And I realized that I enjoy creating curriculum too. And so a few years later, I had the chance to take a course. So there's this startup called Maven. They teach subject matter experts like me how to turn the knowledge into a live online course. And then they offer also the software and, make that happen. And they taught me how to design a course. And the end result of that is FP&A Bootcamp, my course where I teach finance teams and business leaders FP&A skills like financial storytelling, business partnering, forecasting. And yeah, I do that live over Zoom because I really enjoy the interaction with people and, seeing how it helps them.
Wow, that's really interesting. Maven, huh?
Yeah, they're great. I'm really happy I stumbled into that about a year and a half ago.
So today you're the head of FP&A training at Data Rails. So tell us what a day in your life looks like.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to get the chance to move also closer to training in my, call it, day job, right? So at Data Rails, I'm the head of FP&A training, and the role really has two aspects. The first one is training our clients on how to enhance and automate their FP&A process using the Data Rails software. And currently, I'm working on a certificate course where clients can go through, step-by-step instructions and then get hands-on experience through guided exercises. It's the first part. The second part is training my colleagues inside of the company on FP&A best practices, so they can pass it on to their clients. And why I'm really excited about this is that, how I feel I have these different areas that I've done for a long time that I'm really interested in, FP&A, of course, teaching, but then also process automation, and helping people automate and getting out of manual work. And I feel like in this role, they're all those circles overlap, and doing that is really rewarding for me. And it's also a great synergy with the work that I'm doing on my own company, for FP&A Bootcamp. So yeah, that's how I ended up there.
So is there anything you miss about leading, implementing, and practicing FP&A as opposed to training people?
Yeah, I had a chance to train close to 200 finance professionals with FP&A Bootcamp this year.
Wow.
And the impact, thank you. The impact I have with that is definitely greater than if I had just continued to focus on leading one FP&A team in one company. That said, I may take on some consulting work in the future if I feel the urge to get back into FP&A directly. I'm sure that will happen soon, and then I'm happy to do more consulting there.
And let's talk about FP&A Bootcamp. And maybe you've already touched on this, but tell us about why you decided to start your own company alongside your full-time role.
Yeah. So when I moved from long career in consumer goods into the world of fast-moving tech companies, at first I was a bit concerned about, okay, will my skills be transferable, right? Will what I learned at large multinational companies work at small startups, and will it work in an industry that's completely different, right? Moving from physical products that you have to produce and store and ship to software, which can create it immediately, and especially software as a service, which is a whole different business model. But when I started the role at Squarespace, I realized that almost everything I learned over the years is transferable, because the challenges that FP&A teams deal with are the same. How do you improve your forecast accuracy while environments are changing? Or how do you get information from your cross-functional business partners sooner so you can do more with the data? These kinds of challenges were the same no matter what the industry is. And at the same time, I realized that learning FP&A is difficult if you don't have great mentors, like I had, because the universities don't do a great job at it.
Yeah.
And most companies, they have training programs, for covering, lots of general topics, but very few companies have their own training program for FP&A because it's usually such a small team. And so I thought, oh, wow, there really seems to be a gap in the market. And it's something that I enjoy doing, teaching FP&A. And so why not go out and create a company and a course around that?
And who's your ideal client and how do they find you?
Yeah, so going into this, my original assumption before I started doing it was that probably most people would be junior financial analysts at large companies, but actually about 70% of my students are senior managers, directors, and above at small companies. And they take the course because they don't know what they don't know, right? And you can't Google that. Because FP&A is such a broad field, touches so many different aspects, both on the technical side and on the soft skill side. And they take the course to see how other companies are approaching the things that they're approaching, and maybe also what are some best practices, and how they find me. So I'm fortunate that actually my website ranks pretty high on Google, and also the Maven platform brings a lot of people. I'm almost not spending anything on ads. But I am posting frequently on LinkedIn, because it's also important to me that I share some of what I learned free of charge, because not everyone can afford, or not everyone has a company that has a learning and development budget that pays for the course. And so I'm also sharing a lot on LinkedIn, and that's where people find me as well.
That would be great if we could just Google what don't I know that I need to? Maybe someday.
Right.
So what's the first thing you teach your clients about FP&A?
Yeah, so I always start with teaching them how to separate real insights from raw data, because to me that's really at the heart of any FP&A role. It doesn't matter what your focus is. And the importance of separating insights from raw data continues to grow, especially in these times, because finance teams develop their digital capabilities, they get better tools, they have more access to real-time data, and they need to learn how to manage that and how to not drown in data. And so in the first workshop of FP&A Bootcamp, we go over real-life examples of what great root cause analysis looks like. A root cause is the ultimate reason for why you see a variance between forecasts and actuals, for example. And we talk about how you know that you've done enough digging to understand what's the story behind the numbers and how to get there.
Yeah, that's great. I imagine a lot of people do drown in an ocean of data.
Yeah.
So much available these days.
Yes.
So what are the essential skills of financial planning and analysis? What is it that a good FP&A expert possesses?
Yeah, so I group financial planning and analysis skills into 4 areas. The first one is financial storytelling. So that's telling a story of the business by identifying insights, making clear recommendations, which then helps with strategy settings and highlighting changes in trends and metrics before it results, while you can still do something, right, early enough. That's financial storytelling. The second aspect, the second grouping of skills is business partnering, right? Because so much of the impact that a finance professional or finance leader has depends on others taking action on what we're recommending, right? So I have an entire workshop focused on how do you get a seat at the table where decisions are made? How do you build your relationships with your business partners? And how do you do things like managing budgets without being seen as the budget police, right? Who always says no to everything. And we also touch a bit about influencing and that brings it all together. The third aspect is financial modeling. So that's how do you make decisions about investments? So how do you determine whether an investment is going to make sense? We look at different types of financial models, when do you use which model, because this is something that is often over-engineered. People build a model that's so complex that others can't understand it. And if they're being asked to run a sensitivity, it may take them 2 hours, right? And that's really not the goal. So I focus on building financial models that are optimized for fast iteration. So you can stay on top of things and ideally give a response in the middle of a meeting. And the final aspect is, of course, financial planning and forecasting. So how do you design a financial planning process so that's not just about the numbers? Because the numbers will get outdated, latest a few months later. So it's about how do you create the process to get people to take a step back, to really reevaluate, are our strategies working? How do we translate them to action plans? And then how do we measure those action plans? And how do we do that in a way that we can learn something from the differences there? And we also talk about forecasting techniques and a bit about machine learning as well, because that's one of the big aspects there. Yeah. So that's how I would break up FP&A.
Yeah, sounds like very valuable courses that any finance professional could benefit from.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I imagine you've met a lot of CFOs in your line of work. So do you have an opinion as to what makes a great CFO?
Yeah. So to me, it's really 4 things. So financial storytelling and business partnering, as I just mentioned, are important skills for any finance leader, especially the CFO, because the CFO is essentially the face of the company towards investors together with the CEO. And they need to be able to understand not just how the finances work, of course, and what their finance team does, but they need to be able to look further than that and understand all the key business drivers of the business and how those strategies translate into action plans to be able to tell the complete story. So business partnering and financial storytelling for CFOs, in my opinion, are closely interwoven. You can't really do one thing without the other, because to get a complete story, you need to have those relationships with the other executives to really understand, how the business works. And on top of that, process is incredibly important for CFOs to focus on, because change is a constant in today's environment, and great CFOs, in my opinion, need to lead it. They need to be in front of it. So they're not always playing catching up with what the competition does. And that's especially important when it comes to process, because then if that's top of mind, you can continually think about, okay, how do I raise effectiveness and efficiency by trying to do things differently, or maybe by bringing in different tools, and always staying on top of that. And related to process, I would put financial controls underneath that. That's, of course, bread and butter of any CFO, is to make sure that all of these changes and efficiency improvements don't come at the cost of fiduciary discipline, risk management, and financial controls. And the final aspect is leadership, right? So successful CFOs need to be inspiring leaders. The finance team looks up to them, but really the entire company should see them as an inspiring leader. That they need to have their people's back, help them remove blockers, and at the same time being crystal clear about expectations, goals, and the direction everyone is heading in. So those 4 areas is really where great CFOs don't just master 1 or 2 of them, they excel in all 4, and then they become a well-rounded CFO in my opinion.
And you mentioned your course covers this, but how can CFOs ensure that they have a seat at the table when those big strategy decisions come around?
Yeah, we covered that in the course, but I can talk a bit more about that. So the only way to have influence and get a seat at the decision table is through building trust, I would argue. If cross-functional business partners don't trust you, then they won't share information early enough when big decisions need to be made. And then we're just, always a step behind. That's because, they may fear that finance will immediately cut their funding. For instance, if one of the initiatives appears to have a slow start, because if we're not careful, that's the impression that they may have of finance, right? As that we're the ones who are always focusing on the bottom line and, cutting costs, etc. And so CFOs need to build the trust by showing that they can do more than managing budgets and updating forecasts, right? They need to show they understand everyone's goals and challenges and that they can make suggestions, of course, rooted in financial analysis, but suggestions that don't just say no to things, but that help the other leaders reach their goal. And then once trust is achieved, there's this flywheel of effective business partnering. So trust leads to improved relationships with cross-functional leaders. That in turn results in more collaboration and information sharing. And then CFOs can use that information to make concrete recommendations about how to help the company reach their goal. And that then brings positive change, which will bring more trust, which then makes the whole flywheel turn faster. So that's a framework we explore more deeply in the course as well. Yeah. And the most important thing with all of that is that the starting point to getting a seat at the decision table is trust. That's where people need to focus on first to make anything happen.
And we touched on this a bit with all of the data available and boiling the ocean, but how can CFOs or finance leads avoid getting bogged down in the numbers?
Yeah, that's something that can happen easily nowadays as more and more data becomes available. And so really finance leaders need to become masters at filtering, essentially. And to do that, it's really important to remember to take a step back, because there's always fires to focus on. There's always things that appear urgent. But if we always go after all the next urgent thing, then we may never really step back and look at, okay, does it even make sense what we're looking at? And if CFOs, finance teams do that, they'll then also realize that we shouldn't just focus on financial metrics that have a dollar sign attached, right? We also need to look at non-financial metrics, operational metrics, because they can often be a leading indicator. So a metric that tells us something about the future of the business. For example, the number of calls to our support hotline may tell us something about quality issues in the product that maybe don't yet show up as a dip in revenue, but might in the future. And doing that, I know it may sound like, okay, now they need to look at even more numbers. But by doing that, it can free up some space to step back more and to evaluate more, because we can spot issues before they become fires and address them earlier on.
And what advice do you give on FP&A reporting?
So to me, the ultimate goal of FP&A reporting is making recommendations about how to improve the company performance. And I touched on this already a little bit, but the difference between best-in-class and mediocre FP&A reporting really comes down to great reporting surfaces real insights, and mediocre reporting merely highlights data points. right? And a real insight that identifies the root cause. And I can actually I'm happy to share a rule of thumb that I use and that I teach to help people know when they found a real insight, a real root cause. And when they know, okay, now I have it, now I can stop digging. And that rule of thumb is you reach the point where you have an insight when it clearly suggests one or maybe two actions. So let me give you an example. We missed the revenue target because of lower sales of product X. That's not a real insight. That's not a root cause. Why? Because there are a million things the company could possibly do to improve sales of product X, right? It's not really pointing to anything. But if you figure out that the website converted fewer leads to sales of product X, now we have a root cause. Now we have a real insight because an action becomes immediately apparent. Well, if I know that the website converted fewer leads, which resulted in lower sales, then I should probably start by reviewing each aspect of my website and looking to improve click-through rates and conversion rates. So my number one advice for making more impactful FP&A reports is don't stop digging until you have found the root cause, which you know you have when you can point to a specific action that the company should take.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just curious, once you set that report on someone's desk, how do you encourage them to take action?
Yeah. So it's not enough to, even if you have great insights, it's not enough just to email out the report and then hope for the best. What I found is many FP&A teams have a check-in, have a review meeting after the month-end close, at the end of the period, either monthly or quarterly. But then you're just talking about the past or maybe, some forecast updates, but it's very high level. What I recommend is having more frequent review meetings, maybe even on a weekly basis. And I'm not saying that finance teams should update their forecast on a weekly basis. That would be, overkill. But what people can do is mathematically calculate, how are we tracking for the month? You're not really doing much. You're just setting up a formula and then meeting with the team and discussing, okay, here's how we're tracking from a financials point of view. Now, what does this mean? What does that mean to the business? And I learned that frequency really matters. If you're trying to do that only once a quarter or even just once a month, it's not enough time to really build the trust, build the relationships, show that you can do more than doing, standard reporting. But if you meet weekly with your cross-functional team, that's really where you can start to make the magic happen and see how the company acts on your recommendations.
And you've worked at multinational companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, and also fast-growing tech companies like Squarespace and DataRails. You touched on how they're the same, but how does the role of finance leader change between the two?
Yeah, so a big difference is that when you work for a large company, finance roles tend to be fairly specialized. So you may be responsible just for one aspect of the income statement, for example, marketing expenses or sales expenses, R&D expenses, and you're focused on that, and you need to develop a lot of depth in that field because, it's expected that you don't just know the numbers, you also know the business side of things. That's the same in a small company. You also need to know the business side of things, but you need to be much more of a generalist because most likely you'll be responsible for an entire P&L, from sales all the way down to profit, and which means that it's harder to be an expert in any one area, but you need to learn enough about all the different business drivers that are impacting your business. So you need more breadth. And the advice that I give people there is just talk to your business partners more frequently and ask a lot of questions. And then people sometimes come back to me and say, hey, but if I ask them a lot of questions, I might just not. Isn't that selfish? I might not just bothering them and taking time away from their work. But actually, if you're asking questions the right way, if you're asking them in a way that gets people to think outside the box, you're actually helping them with asking the questions, and it's not selfish. So yeah, that's how I would approach that.
And what advice do you have for aspiring CFOs or finance leads out there listening today?
So let me tell a quick story there. So
Sure.
the best advice that I got in my career was relatively early in my career, where I was working in an FP&A role, partnering with the sales team. And the sales, so I was working hard. It was pretty early in my role. I was still learning, and one day I was late at my desk, head down, working on a spreadsheet, when the VP of sales, the most senior executive in the office, walked over to my desk. It was already after 6 p.m. Most people were already gone, including my boss and his boss. And I was a bit concerned when he started to walk over to me, because I was concerned it means that I forgot to send him something. He needs it urgently, and I may not know how to get it done quickly because everyone else had already left the office. And so he walked over to my desk. When he was there, I immediately noticed, it wasn't anything like that. He was super nice. He asked about how I'm doing. And he said, "Look, I know you're working very hard, but understand that it's a process. Whenever you step outside of your comfort zone grows." And it didn't fully register with me at first. It took some time for it to sink in, for me really to think it through. But what he was talking about is growth mindset, right? The idea that when you do things that seem very challenging, like presenting ocean of numbers in front of people who know them better than me, it seems challenging at first, but once you keep doing it, all of a sudden you get comfortable doing it, your comfort zone grows, and you have more capacity doing things, that you felt impossible before. And that stuck with me over the years. And that's something that I keep getting back to. Something that was really helpful when I was promoted into more senior roles, and something that, I would also give as advice to people who are about to take on their first CFO role or senior leadership role, is that just take it step by step. Don't be shy about going out there and doing things that you've never done before, because that's how your comfort zone grows.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. So lastly, as an FP&A expert, what's keeping you up at night these days?
Yeah, so right now, of course, there's a lot of concern out there about the recession and what a broader recession, what the impact may have on everyone's business. And what keeps me up at night about that is that some companies may make the decision to slow down skill acquisition in corporate finance, right? Or maybe slash their learning and development budgets. And I hope that finance leaders realize that many of the challenges they're facing aren't unique, especially in a downturn. And other finance teams also struggle with them, like declining forecast accuracy when the speed of change increases, lower cross-functional cooperation because department leaders fear budget cuts, or even risk of burnout because a reduced workforce has to struggle through avoidable manual work. And, other companies share these issues, and there are solutions for all of these challenges. And so, yeah, I hope that CFOs keep in mind that they don't need to reinvent the wheel when courses like mine and others, exist that can help them, that they can use to address them efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, I have a quick question about your course. Is it on like a set timeline, like it starts on January 1st every year, or is it on like someone's own timeline?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's 4 workshops via Zoom over 2 weeks. So Tuesday, Thursday. And I run the course about every 2 months. So I'll run one in the middle of January, and then the next one will probably take place in the second half of March.
It's good to know. Christian, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me, Megan. It was great conversation, great questions, and yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing about your experiences and all of the resulting insights, and I wish you the best. It sounds like you're doing some really amazing things.
Thank you. Same to you.
And to all of our listeners, please tune in next week, and until then, take care.
If you're ready to boost efficiency and streamline your accounting processes at significant cost savings, it's time to talk with Personiv. Their people-powered solutions have transformed the delivery of back-office tasks and general accounting functions for decades, partnering with clients to provide everything from accounts payable to payroll services. See what Personiv can do for you by visiting personiv.com.
You've been listening to CFO Weekly, presented by Personiv. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to hear all of our episodes. Want to learn more? Check out personiv.com. Thanks for listening.